What if it was possible at any moment in our life to connect to this place in ourselves where there's no fear? And what if we could live like this all the time, every moment of every day? Acting, speaking, working, playing, loving, dancing, creating from this place of no fear. You can imagine how our life would be different, wouldn't it? And that's why I say remember when you tasted it, because it is already in all of us. This knowing of living without fear is already in all of us. Now, hearing these words, you might not agree. Specifically, the mind ego might say, no, that's not possible. He's talking rubbish. Or, yes, I had that once, or 50 times, but now it's gone forever. I don't know how to get it back again. So the mind, intellect, ego will create various stories to say, no, it's not possible. I can't live like that. I can't be like that. It can't be so simple. And there's a very close connection between fear and searching, looking, wanting, and feeling that we are lacking something, feeling that we're missing something. This is what I wanted to talk about more this evening. Is it true? Is it really true that we're missing something, that we're lacking something? Is that really true? Again, one part of our being, maybe the intellect ego, might say one thing, and the other will say another thing. And then it's a bit of a paradox. How is it possible that right in the present moment, I've got two voices in my head? Like in some of the cartoons, you get the angel and the devil on the shoulder of the main character, or in the fairy tales, or in the movies. We have these two voices sometimes simultaneously, or one after the other, saying, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Because our lifetime of conditioning, education, conditioning, experiences, starting not from the moment we were born, but it starts from shortly after we were conceived. The conditioning starts in the womb. And we're like sponges and we absorb everything around us. We know what's happening. Has anybody done a regression? Hypnosis regression or something like that? Back into the womb. So we discover that this conditioning education process that started when we were in the womb is creating moment by moment by moment these two voices. One says yes, one says no. One says I want it, one says I don't want it. One says I love it, one says I hate it. One says I'm afraid, the other one says there's nothing to be afraid of. And it's exhausting. For most of us, it's exhausting. This inner conflict. And we can say, because we're exhausted, our energy is being taken by these two internal voices. Maybe it feels like there are many voices. Our energy is low. So we turn to various things in life. Of course, substances. Of course, certain types of food, relationships, money, possessions, recognition. We turn to all kinds of things to try and fill this energy void that we have. And it works for a short while, doesn't it? We feel good, we feel happier, we feel more peaceful. But then we find that the batteries are running down again and we have to keep topping it up. So then at some point we turn to spirituality or religion, because we've tried many of the other things. And we desperately hope the answers are going to be found in the words, in the practices, in the books, in the mantras, in all these different things we do on our spiritual path. And again, it works for a short amount of time, but then it doesn't last. So it's like being one of those little rats on a big wheel, and we keep running and running and running and running. And it's never ending, this search. Now the problem is, if we can say it's a problem, our conditioning and our life experience is added to by our whole genetic inheritance, all the genes of our ancestors in the DNA, the memory in the DNA, combined with the lifetime of conditioning, is creating every single moment of our life. So if we've had a lot of pain and suffering, a lot of doubt, let's say, anxiety, whatever it is, hatred, betrayal, in our genetic line, then we will be experiencing that in our life. And many of you who've done a lot of work on yourselves, a lot of therapies, a lot of practices, you're still finding that things are coming up and you can't explain where they're coming from. So go to her. She's very good at cleaning it all out. Not just her, but other people or practices. So maybe fear and living in fear like this is just a product of our genes and conditioning. Maybe. Maybe not. But if there are moments in our life when we experience no fear and we just taste this delicious knowing of who we are, we can't understand it, then how is it possible that our genes and our conditioning are completely controlling who we are? Then it doesn't make sense, does it? So then we look for other explanations. So we say there's karma, and there's reincarnation, and there's other dimensions, and there's aliens, and we invent all kinds of stories to explain why we are suffering in this life. And a lot of the religions are full of them. A lot of the spiritual practices are full of them. These stories to try and explain to the ego why we are feeling like this, why we are suffering, why we're not living to our fullest potential. It feels like we're living with the handbrake on. Like when you drive a car, you've got the handbrake on. You can't go very fast. The minute you turn the handbrake off, wow, that's a difference. For most of us, it feels like there's a handbrake on, or partially on, or it comes on and it goes off. And then we have moments where it's just flowing. Something else is happening. And we think, oh my God, it must be some outside force. Maybe it's a spirit. Maybe it's the other person. Maybe it's the place. Maybe it's the teacher. Maybe it's the beads or the special clothes or the temple or the church that's giving me this energy, that's helping me to experience this amazing flow. But it's not. It's always coming from within. It's always coming from the source that we are. the God that we are, the energy that we already are, consciousness that we are, the universe that we are. And one of the things that makes it feel like the handbrake has been taken off or on is fear. Is fear. Now this thing called the ego doesn't have a location. If we look for the ego, we can't find it. It doesn't have a fixed home anywhere in our body or mind. Ego is just a thought. I, me, these little thoughts. That's what the ego is. Sometimes the ego is here, and it's helpful to talk. I am Ragi. And sometimes the ego is not here. We can't say anything. So depending on how this ego, I, thought, has been educated and conditioned, we will live from fear or we will not live from fear. Most of us have had parents who were fearful of something in their lives. And they had parents who were fearful. And for thousands of generations, humanity, human beings have lived on this planet with a specific kind of fear. I'm not talking about the kind of fear where you see a wild animal and you need to run away to save yourself. No. Not just the fear of survival in nature, or knowing that if we don't drink enough water, then we will die. Not that kind of fear. I'm talking about the kind of fear which is based on beliefs. And all of us have these repetitive beliefs, don't we? Various belief structures. Each one of us has a specific kind or kinds of belief structures that tell us various stories and tell us the consequences of our actions. And we imagine stories in the future. The mind's good at that. I used to be terrified of public speaking. You won't believe that now, because now I quite like it. But at a moment in my early teenage years, I was terrified of it. So I entered a contest at school where we had to speak publicly. We had to memorize a poem and then say the poem in front of the class. And then if you got through the next round, you said it in front of a panel of teachers. And if you got through the next round, you said it in front of the whole school. And I ended up in the finals in front of about 700 people. And of course I forgot my lines because fear took over. But through the other 2 rounds, or maybe it was 3 rounds, there was no fear. Something was just flowing. I'd forgotten that I was a dyslexic. I'd forgotten that I was stupid. I'd forgotten that I didn't like public speaking. I'd forgotten all those things in those moments. And it was just flowing. But in the final round, in front of 700 people, there came the fear, and my voice was paralyzed. I forgot my lines. And of course I didn't win. But it was an amazing experience, because something in the body, not the mind, something in the body, which I call the cellular memory, learnt that I was not just my beliefs. I was not just this fear. And that's actually the way we learn. Some of you probably know this really well. We think we learn through the intellect. That's very helpful, yes. We think we learn emotionally. That's very helpful, yes. We think we learn physically. That's also very helpful, yes. But it's an energetic intelligence. It's an energetic intelligence. And it's an energetic intelligence which is not just located in our body or mind. So we understand that it's in the aura or the energy field. And now there's photography which can actually take photographs of the human energy field. And it's amazing to see that. Up till about 20 years ago, that technology didn't exist. I actually met one of the guys in India who was part of a team that started to take the first photographs of the human energy field. Maybe it was 25, 30 years ago, I can't remember. But this energy intelligence is not even in the energy field. This energy intelligence is everywhere, all the time. And this is what quantum physicists are telling us. Every particle, although it's still a theory to some extent, every particle knows where every other particle is. And it knows what it's doing. So if we think we're being controlled by our governments and our spies and the drones and the listening devices, the particles are much, much worse, because every particle knows where every other particle is and knows what it's doing. And that literally means the particle in my leg and the particle in the floor know exactly what they're doing. And the particle in between, in the air, also knows, which means the particle in your brain or your eye or your leg or your hair or the camera or the pineapple over there, they all know. They all know this secret, which is not a secret. They all know who they are. Every particle knows what it is. And we can call that a divine intelligence. You can call it whatever you want, a divine matrix, a divine life force. Or drop the word divine and just say life force, energy. And this life force energy makes our body function. The heart is beating without the brain telling it to beat. We know that the heart forms in the fetus before the brain. So the heart is beating before the brain is formed in the fetus. We're not saying, come on hair, grow, grow, grow. Because if that was the case, then I'd be telling my bald patch here to grow more hair. But I can't do that. Maybe I can one day. So there's a life force here, an energy here, and it's so obvious that it's making this body function. And if we look at it more and more closely through meditation and other practices, we realize we have absolutely no control over this organism, or very little control. Then we look at nature, we see the same life force. We look at the planets and the stars and the galaxies, and then we wonder, why is the spiral shape of a galaxy the same spiral shape as the top of a flower? And when you calculate the mathematics of that spiral, it's exactly the same proportions. And the Greeks knew this, and other civilizations knew this. So they developed the golden section for their buildings, and their music, and their art, and other things. And even today, it's used, but not deliberately. For example, 747s, which are still around, the big airplanes, 747s. If we measure the length of the 747 and the wingspan of the 747, and we compare it to a dragonfly, it has the same proportions. If we take the Fibonacci series and we look at certain music, it has the same proportional sequences. So we find in nature this energy, which we call a natural energy, is actually very specific. It's designed. It has certain specific laws. My teacher used to call it a cosmic law. There's a cosmic law which seems to be making everything function, from the smallest subatomic particle to the most amazing universe which cannot be measured. So why is it that we feel separate? Why is it we believe we are separate? And why is it then do we suffer loneliness and all kinds of different pain? If it's so obvious that we are part of this energy, and some of us even say that, yes, I know I'm this energy, yes, I know I'm consciousness, but the suffering keeps coming up, keeps coming up, keeps coming up. And we keep coming to satsang, or reading the books, or watching the videos, or doing various practices to try and end our suffering. What makes us seek? What makes us start seeking? What makes us ask questions which billions of other people are not asking right now? They're getting on with their lives. Most of Cluj is not here tonight. They're not interested in this. Is it because they're happier with what they're doing right now? Is it because they don't care? Because they're not interested? Or simply because the seeking was not ignited in them? The fire of seeking, the desire to find out, that desire to know, didn't start in another human being. Or is it something else? That's one of the mysteries of this seeking process. It just happens for all of us at a certain point in our life. So is it possible that that seeking came from this energy? The same energy that makes a seed grow into a tree. Is it possible that the seeking came from that same energy? Is it possible that the seeking came from the same energy that makes the heart beat or the blood flow? Is it possible? And if your mind, ego, is open to that possibility, that there is actually only one energy that's making everything happen, everything function. If your mind, ego is open to this, then we can dive deeper. We can explore this more. And if it's not, then it's not. There's nothing wrong with you. You haven't done anything wrong. You're not a bad person. When I first heard of this concept, 2 years before I met my spiritual teacher, I was not open. I was given a book, I read a few lines, no resonance. About a year and 3 months after that, I picked up a magazine. There was an article about my teacher and this teaching, these concepts that I'm sharing. Again, I didn't resonate so much with him, but I started to resonate more with other voices that were saying similar things. And then when it was time, when there was readiness, when there was openness, something happened in my heart. I was desperate for it. Nothing could hold me away. And I left Sri Lanka to fly to India. I was living in Sri Lanka. I left to fly to India to meet him for the first time, not knowing if I would ever come back. Not knowing what would happen to me, whether I would die, whether I'd lose my mind. I'd heard about one guy that had lost his mind for 20 years and he'd forgotten who he was and he'd been put into mental hospitals and he'd practically starved, he'd been in jail. He was a poor farmer in India. And I thought, well, if that happens to me, that's what has to happen to me. Because I had no fear in that moment. There was such a strong desire in my heart to find the answers to my questions. So I left. I even told my mother, look, let's have a joint bank account. I had some money saved up. And I thought, if I lose my mind, if I forget who I am, at least she can get that money. If I can't sign checks or I don't know who I am, let her benefit from that money. And the day I went home with the forms for her to sign, she's very cunning, she's very intuitive. She said, "Are you not coming back?" And I said, "Of course I am, Mama," but I explained to her, it's practical. This is, but in my mind, I didn't know whether I was coming back. I'm not saying that's the way you should be. I'm not saying that's the way it happens for everybody. But however it's happening, this seeking, we have to admit, all of us, that we're not really in control of this. We'd like to be, maybe, in control of it. Maybe there's a part of us that's terrified of not being in control. But there's another part that's quite excited, that's quite seduced, that likes the idea of not being in control, or at least not being responsible. Because then we can let go of all the guilt that we've been carrying around. We can let go of the shame. We can let go of the blame. We can let go of the hatred. We can let go of the pride. If we let go of responsibility and give ourselves to God, or to this energy, or to life, or to something, and finally, I'm not responsible anymore. And all of us have experienced that moment. All of us experience that moment quite regularly, where suddenly it doesn't make sense to blame myself. It doesn't make sense to blame the other person. There's no logical sense there, because when we look at the action that we've done, or the action the other person has done, we're blaming ourselves, we're blaming the other. When we look at it, it's ridiculous. Something happened which we could not control, which made that thought come. And the thought went to a choice, and the choice went to action. But the mind ego doesn't like that for some of us, because we've been told all our life, you're responsible, you're the doer, you should be better than this, don't be bad, be good, try harder. Even in the legal system, we judge people based on this. If you turn up in court, I haven't tried it yet, but I'm going to one day, turn up in court and you say to the judge, "Your Honor, I'm not the doer. I'm not the author." It just happened, Your Honor. It just happened. I didn't control the way that car came across, and it was raining, and then a ball ran across the street, and then suddenly the fire hydrant burst open. I wasn't in control of the fact that I'd argued with my wife, and I was hungry, and I had a toothache, and suddenly, see, whatever it is, something happens, and a thought comes. A thought can come from memory, and we know that. And that's very useful to do our work, to play sports, to dance, ride a bicycle. So memory and thoughts is very useful to do things, practical things. We don't want to get rid of that. We want those kinds of thoughts. We want those kinds of memories. But then a painful thought comes, or a fearful thought, or a worrying thought from the past. And the mind goes into the future. The thought comes from the past, and the mind goes into the future, and actually creates an imaginary story of what might happen. Even though it might be based on something that's happened many times in our life, we never know how it's going to happen in the future. We never know this. But the mind thinks, I know, so it creates this story, and then fear arises, worry, anxiety. Various beliefs come up. And that affects our action in the moment. It affects our behavior in the moment. It happens so fast we're not aware of it, we're not conscious of it. Even the people who've practiced for 30, 40, 50, 60 years of meditation, I've met very senior meditators, very senior monks and priests, who are most of the time quite calm and loving and accepting, and then occasionally something will happen and it all changes in that moment. And that was my experience as well. We can't control which thought comes and how it's going to go from the past into the future. None of us can. And then there are other thoughts which come from the past and don't go into the future. And I call that the working mind. The first one is the thinking mind. Past, future, future, past, future. The thinking mind is never in the present moment. And we all know this from our experience. But the working mind takes past experience and information and uses it in the present moment to do a particular task, something practical, even if it's just dancing or riding a bicycle. And that's very useful, the working mind. And the working mind sometimes goes into the future to do some planning. That's also the working mind. But the working mind has no worry, anxiety, or expectation. The working mind has no worry, anxiety, or expectation. And the working mind is not blaming, is not feeling guilty, is not feeling shameful, proud, or hateful. That's the thinking mind. The thinking mind is generating stories that make us believe that we are in control. Very simply put, imagine if you had been educated differently from the time you were born. If the messages we'd heard had been quite different. First of all, if we'd all been told, you are one with life, you are one with God, you are one with the universe, instead of the other messages we've received from our religions and our spiritual teachings. If we'd all been told we are one with everybody and everything. Now the strange thing is every baby before about 1.5 to 2.5 years old knows this oneness. There's no doubt about it. If we could remember how we felt as babies, we would immediately remember this feeling of oneness, this knowing that we were one with everything, that there was no separation. And that's why a baby's so curious, partly. It wants to go and experience all the things which it picks up with its senses, because it knows those things are itself. So it wants to experience itself. It wants to touch itself, taste itself, smell itself. And then the conditioning starts. Some of the conditioning is very healthy. Don't put your hand in the fire again. Don't put your hand in the blender, that's not good. Don't put your hand in the plug. So we learn these mechanisms to protect ourselves. Those are very healthy. They're practical, they're useful. But if we had not learnt the message, if we didn't have the belief that we are separate beings, how would our life be different today? That's the first, what I call, core belief. I am separate is a core belief which makes us experience suffering in this life. And it's a very specific kind of suffering. It's psychological and emotional suffering. This core belief, I am separate, actually contributes is the source of our psychological and emotional suffering. Think about it for a moment. When you suddenly have a thought, I'm alone. A thought, I've been abandoned. A thought, I'm not worthy. Any of what we call negative thoughts. If you didn't believe you were separate, would you believe these thoughts? In your own head? Or if somebody was telling you? No. But because this belief, I am separate, is so deep in this organism, it's an unconscious belief. We don't even notice it coming up. We don't notice it's behind all the other beliefs. So it's very difficult to actually get to this belief and pull it out, erase it, throw it away. But that's the core of our suffering. I am separate. If we didn't have this belief, I am separate, we could all sit here tonight and say, I am God. And we might all be called blasphemous in some traditions. Or if you were a woman 600, 700 years ago, you'd be burnt for that kind of thing. Millions of women were burnt as witches for living, for expressing their divinity. Not just their female divinity, but their divinity as a whole. But if you say to yourself, I am not separate, and the lights agree with me, that's why they changed. I've got a team back there of people that are changing the lights and all these kind of things. If you, for a moment, agree with what I'm saying, and you challenge the belief that comes up in your mind, any belief, not just this belief, you challenge any belief that comes up in your mind. You challenge every belief that comes up in your mind. You say no. You say no to the intellect, no to the mind, no to the ego. I am not those beliefs. Then what happens? Better to do it in a safe environment like this, not when you're driving or using cutting equipment like chainsaws and other things. But if we right now say, no, I'm not these beliefs that are coming up in my head, then what are we? Who are we? What is this? What is anything? What is everything? If we challenge these beliefs, everything in our life changes. There's a belief, I am the body. I am the mind. There's a belief, I am love. There's a belief, I am peace. And of course, all the negative beliefs. But if we challenge every single belief, and for just a few seconds, that's all it takes, a few seconds at the deepest level of our being, if we challenge all the beliefs for a few seconds, something else is tasted. Something else is revealed. Something else is known with great certainty. In that moment, we know who we are, who we have always been, who we will always be. And fundamentally, this is what makes us seek, question, look. This is what makes us come to religions later in our life, or come to spiritual events like this. This is the basic search. Who am I really? who am I really? All our questions come from this question. What is my purpose? What is the meaning? How can I find peace? How can I be more happy? Whatever you're looking for consciously, my suggestion is the only really important question to ask yourself, where all the answers will be found in yourself, is who am I? Who am I really? Some of you have already heard this, and some of you are already trying inquiries of this kind. Who am I? What am I? What is this? Am I? Those are these kinds of inquiries. Or we use the mirror of another person to reflect back this knowing. We can do that in many ways, and over the weekend in particular, when we have a bit more time, we will try out these different exercises, different inquiries. Because at any moment in our life, at any moment, an ordinary moment, this deep, deep recognition, this realization can happen. We call it self-realization, we call it enlightenment, we call it awakening, but all it is recognizing what is already known right here. It's not something that comes from outside. These words, whatever energy you're feeling, whatever practices we do, are only things we do to help the mind to relax. Give the mind the answers it needs to the questions it has. And then there's a process that happens naturally. In the same way that our seeking started, this process will happen naturally. And if you resonate, or if you don't, it is meant to happen like this. If you resonate with these concepts, if you connect with it, if you feel good with it somehow, if it makes you curious or excited or something else, that means you're resonating with it. The words, the concepts, the exercises, the inquiries. Then this process, so-called process, is very direct. Any second, any instant, realization can happen. And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't really matter either, because somewhere along the way, the mind ego has understood and accepted these concepts, these ideas. I'm already life. I'm already God. I'm already love. I'm already the universe. And just these kinds of answers help us to live our daily life with more peace, more harmony. It improves the relationship we have with ourselves. It improves the relationship we have with other people. So we might even forget enlightenment, self-realization, awakening, because we're starting to live better, healthier, with less and less psychological and emotional suffering. And I say that because for some people, and I was the same, we pick up this idea of enlightenment, self-realization, awakening, somewhere on our journey. We've read about it, heard about it. We've heard about it in satsang or on a video. And then we go, that's what I want. And I met a young woman recently who admitted this. She said, I was never looking for this, but then I started hearing about it in satsangs. And those teachers were saying, this is the purpose of our life. This is why we are here. This is the greatest human achievement, something like that. So she was kind of like a person who liked achieving things, even like struggling to get things. So her mind liked the idea. This was the ultimate thing as a human being. And so she was chasing this thing called enlightenment. So I had to very politely say to her, she didn't cry very much, you're already what you're looking for. You're already God. You're already life. You're already this universal energy. You're already the light. Whatever the mind ego is saying, from beliefs, from conditioning, we're already what we're looking for, because we've never been separate from it. And this is what I feel Jesus was trying to tell us. But his words were changed over hundreds of years. It was changed, his message was changed, primarily by men, primarily through fear, primarily with the desire to control. If everybody knows they're God and feels totally free, how can you control them? But this is what's available. This is what our potential is, if it's meant to happen in this life, at any moment.